All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight, especially on a nice sunny day like today. To come here after work is pretty nice. Appreciate it. My name is Zach Held. I'm a general dentist in San Carlos. Practice with my wife, Jamie Lau. Interesting topic tonight. I was thinking on the way up here, I thought I was a young dentist, but that's not true anymore. My classmates are now retiring, so I'm closer to retirement than starting my practice, I think. Few announcements. June 25th, we have the Hygiene Study Club. For your hygienists, it would be great if we can get them involved. We're trying to get kind of the whole office involved in the dental society. One of my hygienists is kind of helping to get that moving. Dentists are invited as well, but it'd be ideal if you could tell your hygienist, like we have this starting up. Next, we have the July 16th, cringy mandatory annual workplace violence prevention training. Has everyone done that one? Yeah, it makes you feel. The violence or the training? Either one. Violence? Well, that's how you learn, right? What not to do. August 2nd, we have a job fair. August 7th, Kenny Moore, former neighbor down the street, 3D printing hands-on workshop. August 14th, we have our San Mateo County Dental Society with the Mid-Peninsula, all member and team mixer at the Hiller Aviation Museum. There will be a silent auction. Proceeds will go to the Foothill College Hygiene and Dental Assistant Program. Did everyone get a chance to go to the Dental Expo last year? Yeah, pretty. That was our inaugural year. Pretty cool event. We hope it's gonna just get better and better. It's kind of hoping to be our locally grown substitute for the Moscone Convention. That's August 22nd and 23rd. Please welcome our sponsors. We have Patrick Stevens with Panacea Financial, Tim Yeager from Yeager Dental Supply, and Justin, sorry, Kevin Tuckman and Melissa Jackson with Align Technology. Thank you for making it.
Give me 2 seconds. So I'll start while I'm setting up here. So my name is Kevin, as they're saying, from Align Technology. Most people know Align as Invisalign. So we're part of the same parent company. Align is a parent company. Invisalign is a division. Itero, which is the division I'm a part of. And then Align Technology bought exocad probably about 2 years ago. So from a design standpoint, something that definitely we're looking to do, and we're looking to do that directly on the scanner. So from a technology standpoint, just wanted you all to kind of get an experience here. I appreciate the opportunity to show you the latest. Let me give me 1 sec. Hopefully. Worked before. There we go. As I start sweating, right? So just a little tidbit about technology. Digital scanner used to be PVS, not used to be, but people are, mostly using it. But we've come a long way. About 8 months ago, we developed, came out last year, and then about 8 months ago, we added the restorative capabilities to the Lumina scanner. As you can see, the size, nothing like it. What we have also done is move the technology to the tip. And it's for basically communication with your patients. So a lot of doctors, you have all the information in your head. It's about getting it out to the patient. So one thing that's really amazing that, some of you have seen other scanners on the market, but because we have now moved the technology to the tip with 6 cameras, when we scan, we have 6 different angles. So you're able to capture that much more. You want the biggest field of view by the biggest focal depth. We are 25 millimeter focal depth. Everyone always compares the CEREC, which is 21. And then we're 3 times the field of view of most scanners on the market. Photogrammetry, so we're able to really capture, and the accuracy is really exceptional. We even have an accuracy study that we put out compared to other scanners on the market. When we scan with the Lumina, good if I can scan. It's initializing, it's warming up. But I'll even go so far. Let me show you from another standpoint. So what's really nice about technology here is we take a scan of the patient, and then you'll use this information to help talk to the patient. So if we're looking at tooth health, what we're now looking at is intraoral photos, and then you have your 3D image. So it becomes a way to communicate with your patients. We have time lapse, which is something that you can compare scans. So you tell a patient they grind, they say, no, I don't. I used to grind, right? Well, this is a way to show that they are actually losing tooth structure. When it comes to the actual scanner itself, again, it comes down to being able to capture as we want. And clearly, I will have to say, give me one sec. Hopefully I may take a pause. I set it up before with yes, I set it up, and now we maybe hit the power button. But when it comes to scanning, it is really, we're down to about 2 to 3 minutes for a scan. So I don't want to take too much more of your time. If you are interested, maybe after a break, just come over and be happy to show you. I also do informational sessions. So, love to come into the office and kind of show you what we have and how we can really improve the practice from that standpoint from moving on. So thank you. Appreciate the time. You guys go, and then by the time we go up, I'll have it there. Good.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Oh, thanks. Here, I'll steal your.
Oh, you mic.
If I don't break this one.
There you go.
I know one was broken already.
How you guys doing? Thank you for having us tonight. We appreciate being here. Jaeger Dental's been in business. If we go last 2 more years, it'll be 50 years, and we have many of you in the room to thank for that. You've been around, calling on us for equipment, for service, for advice, and some of you will be listening to how to sell your practice, and we'll be sad to see you go. But no, but with that said, what I want to do is have Justin just speak a little bit on what we're doing for you as far as with our staff and our service. So
we went through a little bit of a transitional period. We lost some of our older technicians, which just like we see in the dental field, and we've had some new blood. We have now 6 technicians, as well as at least one person at the office at all times. We have 9 sterilizer bays where we can work on your sterilizers. We don't do sterilizer repairs really in offices anymore because it doesn't make sense for us to sit there and watch water boil. So we do bring loaners out for any of those services that you guys need. Equipment room, I say this at almost every meeting. Don't forget about your equipment room. Your compressor and your vacuum are your heart and lungs of your office. You really, really, really need them. So on the days that they go down, that's when you're calling us. We do have loaners for compressors, not vacuums usually, not because those are gross. But I just wanted to touch on those things a little. I also want to let you guys know our technicians are factory trained. We've had training in 6 different states from different manufacturers. So they do know your equipment very well, and they are the best ones to work on it. What else we have going on?
With that said, on the equipment end of things, we try and bring some high tech into your office as well. We've got 3D machines that are a variety of stages that they allow you to manipulate the patient's information. Just recently, we were able to get Ray Scan, which is the Ray America, which does a whole Ray face scan, and it integrates their 3D image into the patient's face, so you can actually see a real rendering of how that works. Other than the iTero is a great unit, and it has its purpose. It's just this is just a little different scanning and a little different manipulation and a way to see what's actually in the anatomy of your patient. And it puts it in a perspective that puts it in their face, and they can actually see it. So if you need, we don't have any any digital things for you to look at tonight. Sorry, I kind of dropped the ball on that. But one of the things we are doing in October is we're bringing a laser seminar for a workshop for you. We're going to have 2 lasers. It's going to be hands-on, and there will be a clinician here to answer any questions that you have. This will probably also be something that you can Zoom in on if you're not able to make it in person. I know it is limited because we're limited for space here, but that's something that'll be available in October. So if you're interested in looking at a all-tissue laser that is beneficial in any aspect of dentistry, whether you're a specialist or a general dentist, this is a very viable tool that you can use for many different procedures. Just one of the things that we bring to you is hopefully the high-tech stuff. We're not just a small company, but we are hopefully your company that you go to for all your dental equipment needs. So that's about it. Just thank you very much. Thanks for having us tonight, and we're excited about the topic tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank
you guys.
Thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Jaeger, thank you for making my vacuum pump run. I appreciate that. That was a rough week. Financing, I wouldn't be here without a lot of banking support and scanning. I volunteer at Samaritan House, and I am totally non-functional without a scanner there. It's pretty sad. All right, back to our topic at hand. Ali, leading legal authority in dental law and the founding attorney of Dental and Medical Council, PC. With over 2 decades of experience, his deep connection to dentistry comes from his wife's nearly 2-decade-long career as a pediatric dentist. This personal insight fuels his decision to his dedication to empowering dentists to navigate their legal challenges and achieve their practice goals. In doing so, Ali has helped thousands of doctors open their practices while maintaining legal compliance. Ali is frequently quoted and contributes articles to dental publications, including the California Dental Association, Progressive Dentists, Progressive Orthodontist, Dentistry Today, and Dental Town. And first up, we will have Gavin Shea. He's a recognized and trusted healthcare industry leader with more than 2 decades of experience guiding clients. Are you first? Whoever wants to go first, I guess. 2 decades of experience guiding clients through practice transitions, startups, and growth, with a specific focus on practice transition financing. Gavin brings a balanced, unique perspective of the vital stakeholders that contribute to a successful transition. This experience empowers practice owners to navigate their transitions with ease, confidence, and foresight, ensuring that they rise above challenges and seize opportunities. Without further ado, whoever wants to be first.
So, welcome. We've been doing this presentation exclusively for you sellers for a couple of years now. And the reason we're doing this is because we got a lot of requests from you specifically saying, all I see out there is so much stuff for buyers and startups, but nothing for us sellers, nothing for us, uniquely for us. I don't want any buyers in the room. I just want you to talk to me, And so we did this. We did it at Santa Clara Dental Society, and it was really great. And then we had a really big event at UOP a couple months ago, and it was fantastic. We had a room full of people from as far away as Washington, Oregon, Arizona flew up, UOP alumni to talk about this. And the reason we wanted to do this is because we're at a very unique time in our industry. And the reason it's so unique is because COVID has changed a lot of things. And the reason it's changed a lot of things is that many of you who were maybe never even thinking about selling, 4 or 5 years ago, are now thinking of selling, and more of you are selling at a younger and younger age. And what's interesting about that is that you would think there would be a glut in the marketplace. There would be a lot of people looking to sell, And so not a lot of buyers, but the reality is that there are so many buyers out there that it actually is a really interesting and good time to sell your practice. And so our goal tonight is not to make you necessarily experts, but to give you so much information that you know how to approach the sale of your practice in a very kind of strategic and smart way so that you can find the right buyer, but also you can get the maximum value with your practice. And those two things are very important because obviously, maximizing the value of your practice is important for your retirement and your family and all of those things. But selling to the right buyer and selling it well and strategically is almost equally as important. And the reason is because there's a lot of risk when it comes to selling your practice. And there's a lot of things that buyers are going to ask for and do that you may not be as familiar with. And so what we want to do is educate you about those things so that when the time comes, you know how to make those right decisions to avoid lawsuits in retirement or buyers that are unhappy or any of those things kind of getting in the way of you selling, correctly. So the first thing we were going to talk about is the decision to sell, right? The decision to sell. And I can tell you that there's really no wrong decision in terms of when to sell your practice, whether it's this year or next year or in 4 years. The worst thing you can do, right? The worst thing you can do is actually not making a decision. Right? Not making a decision. Why do you think that's the worst thing you can do? Why is not making a decision and standing pat potentially a problem? You're not prepared. Exactly. If you don't think you're going to ever sell, you're never getting ready to sell, right? That's exactly right. What else? What else? It could be another reason, because that's a really good one. What do you guys think? What's that? You might get caught off guard. Exactly. You might get caught off guard. You may have to sell, God forbid, for medical reasons or family reasons or something else, and that could be a problem, right? And what happens to most of us when we get tired of something? Do we try as hard? You slow down, right? You start taking your foot off the gas a little bit. And what happens when we take our foot off the gas? Well, we start looking forward and enjoying what's coming down the pipe, right? We're looking forward to retirement. We're looking forward to spending time with our spouses, But what happens is that revenue starts to go down. And when revenue starts to go down, it becomes harder to sell your practice. Not because it's a bad practice, but because the banks look at it suddenly and they go, wait, why are you selling because business is going away? Or are you selling for another reason that we don't know? They get nervous, right? They get nervous. And so what we want to teach you tonight is that not making a decision is the worst decision you can make. But making a decision, whether it's to sell today, tomorrow, a year from now, 2 years, that way you can prepare. That's the best decision, right? That's the best decision to make, because then you're going down the right path. And I won't go into sort of my history, but this is sort of all I do. I help dentists, buy and sell practices, partnerships, and things of that nature. But we can skip all that. Let's get into the really the nitty gritty. So we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about some of the legal basics that you should expect in your contracts. These are really important things that you're going to expect in every contract, and I want to tell them to you so you're not surprised. Then we're going to go to what's the biggest risk to you in retirement, which is your employees, believe it or not. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll talk about due diligence, which is what buyers do when they're looking to buy your practice. And then we'll talk about leases, and then finally DSOs at the end, because I know a lot of you have gotten letters and are being harassed by the DSOs. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. Okay, so let's jump into the world of contracts. So this is your world, whether you're buying a practice, but especially if you're selling a practice, this is what you should expect your lawyer to help you with, right? And right off the bat, I want you to look at, the first thing listed on here, a letter of intent. Right? A letter of intent. This is the most overlooked document you will ever see in your life, because it's a non-binding document, right? Which means you can sign it and still walk away. But the problem with it is that it is a very important document because it summarizes everything about the transaction that you and the seller, you and the buyer have negotiated. So what a lot of people do is they don't take it very seriously. They just say, you know what, let's just sign it and then we'll deal with the details later. Okay? Is that ever a good idea? It's never a good idea, right? It's never good. You want to negotiate this letter of intent with the buyers very carefully, right? And the reason is because it's not just the price, it's also about how long do you want to work back? If you are going to work back, how much is the buyer going to pay you to work back, right? When do you want to close? What is the mileage going to be for a covenant not to compete? All these things should be detailed to some degree in the letter of intent, right? In the letter of intent. Don't leave it to deal with later, because what happens is that whatever's in the letter of intent transfers to the legal documents. So you don't get a second bite at the apple, right? You don't get a second bite at the apple, and that's really important. So if you don't want to work back for the buyers, like you want to retire and move with your spouse away and go vacation, you have no plans of working back. If in the letter of intent it says you're going to work back for 3 months, make sure you strike that, right? Change it to something that's a little bit that you're more comfortable with, because the buyer will want you to do that. Okay. The next thing is the asset purchase agreement. This is the document that the lawyers spend the most time on, with the buy and the selling negotiations. The next one, the exhibits, is super important for you guys as sellers. There's 5 exhibits that you're going to get. Okay, and or you're going to be negotiating, or we're going to be preparing for you. And I want to talk about them because they're really important, especially one of them. The first exhibit is an asset list. All the assets that you're selling, right? Your iTero machine, your lasers, everything under the sun that you are selling as part of your practice needs to be listed there. Okay? Easy. The second exhibit is an excluded list. What are you not selling? Okay? So what are some things you're not selling with your practice? What's that? My diploma. Your diploma. It's so funny you say that. I'm embarrassed to say that I have a client who bought a practice and the seller and the lawyer didn't put his diplomas on the excluded list. He refused to give the seller his diplomas. I was like, do you even have a diploma yourself? Like, why do you need somebody else's diploma? Like, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we do that. A lot of times buyers don't necessarily want that, because they want to identify everything very specifically, so that there's no chance that you're walking out with like a CAD/CAM machine or an iTero or something else. But make sure your excluded list has everything you want. If you have a Joe Montana jersey in your office and you want to take that home, make sure it's on that list. Okay? Do not not put it on that list, because the buyers will keep it. I mean, I finally convinced this buyer to give the diplomas back, but it took like 6 months of like discussion with them, but he finally did it. So this exclusion list is very important. So what are the things? Diplomas, family pictures, sports memorabilia that some of you have, artwork that you may have done yourself. Many of you are artists, right? You paint and this and that. All of that stuff, right? Now, some of the things are instrumental to your practice. Like I have a client who is a big surfer, and so he has these like really beautiful antique surfboards all over his ortho practice, and it was part of like the practice. It was like part of the DNA of the practice. So, but there was one special one to him that he wanted. So we left it there for a year, because the buyer said, look, this is part of the practice. I don't want to make a big change. After a year, he got it back, right? And he was totally okay with that, because it was such a big part of the practice. But my point is, make sure your excluded list has everything you want. So that's number 2. Number 3 is an employee list. So a list of all the employees, their titles, their benefits, all of that. Easy. The 4th exhibit, super important. Okay, this is where we're talking about limiting your liability. It's an exhibit called continuing contracts. What is a continuing contract, do you think? Close. What's a continuing contract?
Taking somebody's money for work that you need to be done or a contract?
No, that's a contract receivables, but you're going down the right path. Close. You said that was the same thing. Yeah, very close. So it's contracts that you've signed with companies for the operation of your business that you don't need after you sell. So, for example, many of you are HR for health clients. That's a contract, right? You have a 12-month contract with HR for health. You don't need it after you sell the practice, so you're going to assign that to the buyer, right? Marketing contracts, OSHA, HIPAA companies that you contract with to help you operate. Any contract that you have, you don't need after you sell your practice. You want to make a list of those. And if you said, I want to sell this year, I would start making that list now because we always forget about stuff, right? Yes.
Does that include utilities?
You can put it in, yeah. Yeah, you can put utilities. Usually we don't include things that are month to month, right? Because you can just cancel it and somebody can take it. But I would, out of abundance of caution, I would put that in there. Why not, right? It doesn't hurt. The more you put on continuing contracts, the better. Yes. Good question. The question was would a loan on a piece of equipment on the practice count? It depends, right? It depends. And the reason it depends is usually all debts have to be paid off when somebody buys a practice. So if someone's buying a practice, you as the seller would have to pay off all the debts, which might include the loans. Sometimes there are loans that are not paid off. The buyer just assumes them, right? Gavin, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, that's all part of the discussion, but I would just say that all the loans should be excluded, like as the default position, right? If there's a situation where, you're assuming the loan or the buyer's assuming a loan, sometimes it's favorable terms that does it. It's just part of the purchase price, and it comes into like, how does the practice get paid for? So if you're selling your practice for $1 million, but for whatever reason, the buyer is assuming $100,000 loan, you're going to get $900,000, and then they're going to take that loan on for $100,000, right? It doesn't happen very often.
So it's part of the closing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it only happens in special circumstances where there's an advantage either to you or the buyer, usually both at the same time to make that happen.
Yeah, exactly. So you always lean towards including it in your continuing contracts list unless it's different or negotiated or whatnot, right? You can never go wrong by putting more things in there, okay? More things in there. So again, really important because remember, if it's not on that continuing contracts list, what happens afterwards? If the practice sells, guess what? You're responsible for that contract. So you don't need to be, you don't need a website company if you've already sold your practice, right? So those are the kind of things you got to keep in mind. The fifth exhibit is just a simple bill of sale, right? So nothing to worry about, just it says that you're selling your equipment, someone's buying it. But these 5 are really important. People usually ignore these exhibits because they're at the end of the contract, but they're some of the most important for you as sellers, right? For you as sellers. Lease assignment, you assign your lease to the buyer usually. Our recommendation is that you try to sign or you assign your lease as close to the end of the term of your lease as you can, okay? So if you have, let's say, a 10-year lease and you're in year 8, that's a great time to sell your practice because there's only 2 years left on the lease. And the reason is because you as the seller will be held accountable if the buyer doesn't pay their rent or whatnot for those 2 years. After that, it's on the seller or on the buyer, okay? So the closer to the end of your lease that you can do it, the better. If your lease is running out this year, for example, you want to sell this year, you got to hurry, okay? But I wouldn't sign, for example, a 10-year lease this year because you want to sell next year. You're going to be on the hook for 9 years, okay? Really, really important to time that well.
Can the buyer assume that lease though?
The buyer will assume that lease, but the landlords here in California, what's standard is that landlords hold the seller accountable for the rest of the initial term. And that's the whole point. you want to sell towards the end so that you're held accountable for as low of a period as time as possible.
So if the buyer buys your practice and you have a 9-year lease left,
Yep.
if he doesn't pay the lease, you're still responsible.
In most situations, yeah. I mean, we always try to negotiate it out, but California landlords are very, very difficult on that position. So that's why you want a short amount of time as possible, right? Now, if you did do that, then we'll obviously try to get you out, but you can imagine landlords have no reason to let you out, right? You're the big deep pocket. They don't know the young dentist from anybody, right? So that's what makes them nervous. Associate agreements, as a seller, I would only sign an associate agreement if you're planning on working for more than 6 months, okay? Associate agreements are for the buyer's advantage, not for yours, okay? So if you are only planning on working for a couple of months or a limited amount of time, don't worry about an associate agreement. Let the buyer take the risk. But if you're going to plan on working longer than 6 months, then I would sign an associate agreement just so that you have a way of getting out of it if things don't work out. Okay. Yes. Bill of sale. Yeah. Bill of sale. Okay. Restricted covenant. Let's get into the contract details now. And I'm going to talk not about every term in the contract because that would take about 2 weeks. We're going to talk about a couple of the most important that usually sometimes derail deals. So the first one is a restricted covenant. So what this means is that the buyer, right? The buyer can restrict you as the seller from competing against them. Okay? This is valid law in California. This is not to be confused with covenants not to compete for employees, which are illegal in California. Okay? So the state, and every state actually, has allowed buyers to restrict sellers from competing against them when a business is sold. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? We don't want people to sell their business and then open up their business down the street, because what's going to happen with all the patients, of course? They're going to follow you, and so it ruins the value of the enterprise. So this is a valid thing. Every single contract that you sign when you sell your practice is going to have this language in there. Okay, the average terms are for 5 years. That's very typical. Anywhere from 10 to 15 miles on the low end, unless you're in downtown San Francisco, to 20 to 25 miles on the high end. Okay, so that's usually the radius that you cannot compete in. Okay, so if you're planning on selling your practice and working for a friend that's 15 miles away, make sure your restricted covenant allows you to do that. Okay, but what do you think happens when you guys start negotiating a restricted covenant with the buyers? Trusting. What do you mean there's trusting?
Well, if you're bringing up and fighting over it too much, as a buyer, I would think you have other intentions.
Exactly, right? If you want to make your life very difficult as a seller, please start negotiating on the covenant not to compete, right? Like if you're like, oh, this is going way too smoothly. Gavin found me a buyer in about 2 weeks. Things are going, I'm about to retire. Let me just throw a wrench in the whole thing. Start negotiating on this, because buyers start to get sweaty. They start to get nervous because they go, I don't trust you. You're going to go open up down the street or 20 miles away. And let's be honest, okay? We're just all together, right? There's no buyers in the room. Right? How many of you think that your patients would follow you if you went 10 miles away? Yeah. 15? 20? 25? Yeah. My wife, her pedo practice, she has patients that drive like 75 miles away because they were there in Danville and they moved away and they just keep coming back. Same thing for many of you. We all know patients are loyal. They will follow you. I would drive 25 miles for my dentist all day long. I mean, I am married to her, but still. But, joking aside, right? You would drive. But as soon as you start negotiating that, buyers get nervous. My recommendation is, unless you're truly planning on competing against them, just let them put whatever they want. Let them put whatever they want because it's of no consequence to you, right? Now, if you absolutely want to work for your friend and you just want to cover him or her when they're on vacation or, that's okay. Just tell your lawyer and I will, put it in there in the contract that you can work for your friend for 10 days a year or, whatever it is. And that's totally fine. No buyer will have a problem with that. It's when they're surprised, that's when the problems start. Okay, all right. So just remember that. Okay, the next thing, allocation of the purchase price, super important for you from a tax perspective. So let's quickly go through this. There's two, when you buy and sell a practice, you have to tell the IRS how the assets are allocated between tangible and intangible assets. Okay, tangible is things you can put your hands on, intangible is like goodwill, covenant not to compete. The taxes on this is very different. Everything that is tangible, okay, gets taxed at your normal tax rate. Okay, so most of you are in the top tax bracket, so you'll be taxed at that rate. Intangible is taxed at your long-term capital gains, so 20%. Okay, so the difference is 20+% sometimes, right? So very different. What you should aim for, the average allocation of the purchase price should be 80% towards intangible, 80% towards intangible, 20% towards tangible. Okay, so if you've got $1 million sale price, just to make the math easy, if you've got $1 million sale price, 800,000 would go towards intangible, 200,000 would go to tangible. Okay, and that gives you really good, tax breaks. Now, some of you will have a CPA or a financial advisor that's going to want to impress you, and they're going to say, no, why 80-20? Let's go 99-1, right? 99% intangible, 1% tangible. Let's just stick it to the IRS and get as much money as we can. Is that a good idea? I mean, I am first on the list to stick it to the IRS, believe you me. But if you do that, the IRS will stick it right back to you, right? Because they will audit you, right? In 20 years of me doing this and, thousands and thousands of clients, the only 2 times I've seen a client get audited when they've sold their practice was when they went more aggressive than what I'm about to tell you, okay? Remember, the average was 80-20. But if you go 1 penny over 90-10, right? 90% intangible, 10% tangible. You go even a little bit across that line, I think the likelihood of you getting audited goes through the roof. Because the only 2 people that have ever been audited went more aggressive than 90-10. Now, if your math skills are like my math skills, I would not risk the 90-10, right? I would go like 88-12 or, just make sure you don't not carry the 1 or whatever, and then you go over the line because you will, the likelihood of getting audited is really high. And they don't just stop at the transaction. They will go back 3 years. And if they think you're committing fraud, they will go back 7 years. Okay. So imagine having to deal with that in retirement. It is crazy bad. So remember, 80-20 is like driving 65 on the freeway. All right. 90-10 is like driving like 75. You probably are going to be okay, but you just never know. If you go 1 mile over, the likelihood you will get audited, right? So don't ever let anyone convince you, no matter how smart you think they are, to go more than 90-10, okay? All right. Accounts receivable, that's monies. Any orthodontists in the room? No ortho? Okay, great. So accounts receivable is monies that patients owe you for treatment that's already finished. Different than contract receivables, which is what orthodontists have, or if you do a lot of Invisalign, what you have where people make payments, right, for ortho. So typically you have 2 options. Either the buyer collects it for you for 3 to 6 months and you pay them 5% for the effort of collecting, or you sell them the accounts receivable at a discount off of the value, right? So if you've got like $100,000 of accounts receivable, you might sell it to them for $60,000, $70,000, a discount off of that so that you get the money up front. Okay, so you got to talk to your broker when you're doing this to figure out what's the best case. My recommendation is if you've got 95+% in collections, patients always pay you. Have the buyer collect your AR. If you have 95 plus or less percent, in terms of collections, maybe sell your AR, right? And just kind of be done with it. But a lot of people are like, I just want my money. I don't care about getting every last dollar. I don't trust the buyer. I just want the money, and they'll take a 10, 15, 20% discount just to get their money up front. Okay. So think about that for accounts receivable. Not super complicated, but it is important. Okay. All right. Human resources. Yes.
You have to pay them to collect the money.
Yeah, 5%.
5%.
Yeah, 5% of everything they collect, you pay them on a monthly basis. Now, here's a pro tip, and thank you for bringing that up. Here's a pro tip for many of you, is that if you do decide to have the buyer collect your AR for you, okay, so they're collecting it, make sure you order enough letterhead and envelopes so that they send those invoices under your name as opposed to their name. Because patients will pay you because they know you, right? Even if you've sold the practice, because they think it's coming from you, but they will slow pay any buyer, right? So we have a lot of sellers who are like, no more letterhead, no more envelopes, I'm done. And then they don't get paid because patients are like, I don't know who this new person is, right? So make sure they send it with your stuff. It works really well. Okay, the biggest risk to you in retirement is not from malpractice, it's from your HR, okay? Your employees. The dirty little secret that no one talks about is the fact that there are more lawsuits against you in retirement than anything else from your employees. Why do you think that is, guys? Why would your employees sue you in retirement? What's that? They may not like the new boss because you've suddenly sold them. You suddenly sold the practice and now they have to report to someone new. Absolutely. What's another reason? Did they retire? When I do depositions, I don't do them anymore, but when I used to do depositions and I used to ask this question, hey, why are you suing? It's one of my favorite questions. Why are you suing Dr. So-and-so? And usually it was something along the lines of, I can't retire. They are retiring. I helped them build this practice. I've been with them for 20, 25, 30 years. I can't retire. They're retiring. I want my money. And do you think that's only one person comes after you in retirement? No, when one person gets money, they all line up. They all line up, right? And so you got to be really careful with HR violations in retirement because you don't have the cash flow from your practice anymore, right? To pay them. Remember, you're retired. And you guys may have read about the famous case that I dealt with many years ago. I think it was in the CDA journal where we had a doctor who was sued 7 times in a row in retirement. And they retired early, actually. They were like 55, 56 when they retired. They got sued so many times that they had to actually, in retirement, open up a new practice just to fill their bankroll again because they spent so much of the savings on these HR settlements. It was crazy. It was absolutely nuts. So you got to remember this: 12 to 18 documents for every employee. That's the minimum number of documents you need to have for every one of your employees in your HR files. If you only have 2 or 3 because of your payroll company, you need to get the rest of them. Okay, super important. The statute of limitations is 3 to 4 years, so they can come after you for 3 to 4 years after you sell the practice. For 3 to 4 years, you have this hanging over your head. It's an incredible amount of time. And the average settlement is 1 to 2 times their annual salary, right? 1 to 2 times their annual salary. So you can imagine, right, someone who's making $25 an hour, right, which is about $50,000 a year, the settlement for that one person is $50 to $100K. And that's without attorney's fees and court costs. That's just money that goes into their pocket. Yeah.
Does our liability insurance?
Great question. So the timing of this question and my answer is like really good, really good. So TDIC has something called EPLI, Employment Practices Litigation Insurance. Okay. They have two versions. They have a very expensive version, which you don't need. Don't tell them I said that. And then they have another one. They have another one that's a rider. Okay. It's a rider to your malpractice insurance. And you can get up to $100,000 of coverage for not all HR violations, but about 50% of HR violations. And it's very inexpensive. It's like $600, $700, $800. It's like not inconsequential, right? But you get up to $100,000. Now, here's the thing. It's only available once a year. And that was yesterday, so sorry. No, just kidding. No, it's only available once a year, and that is around July 1. Okay, so it's coming up, right? So if you're thinking of selling your practice and you're not currently in the lawsuit, I would call TDIC and I would say, hey, I heard Ali at our dental society meeting. He said you have something called EPLI. I have malpractice insurance with you. Do I have it? No, you don't. Great, I want to add it. And because we're within the 30-day period of July 1st, they will add it for you. Okay? But it's only available now. If you wait after this deadline, you do not get it for another year. Okay? They will not add it for you, right? So it's only once a year if you have their policy. Now, if you get a brand new policy from them, like if you're, let's say, with another insurance company and you decide to move to them, they will add it as part of a new policy. Okay? This is very important to get because it doesn't cover everything, but it covers a lot of things, right? It covers a lot of things. And so I would recommend that you guys look into it because, again, it's very inexpensive. If, God forbid, you get sued, right? If you get sued. So hugely important. Very easy to get compliant, though, right? Very easy to get compliant. Here's some of the forms you need. Employment application, W-4, the I-9. There's a new I-9, the immigration document, that went into effect. Sexual harassment information sheet. We've sort of forgotten about the Me Too movement, right, since COVID, but it still happens. So you have to give them this sexual harassment information sheet saying you won't sexually harass your employees. If you plan on sexually harassing your employees, don't give them that document, okay? It'll get you more in trouble, all right? Employment manual, you got to get that, okay? And then ad will acknowledgement. The easiest way to get compliant, guys, with all of this is to talk to HR for Health. They will give you all the new hire documents you need. They'll give you all of these things, all the things that employees don't know that they are signing that are giving up their rights to sue you, okay? And there's 3 law firms out there that all they do is they're targeting healthcare employees, especially hygienists and RDAs, and they are sending letters to many of you. Many of you have colleagues here in the society who have been sued, and I know you know who they are. And if you talk to your friends, they'll tell you it's the same law firm again and again and again, right? They're targeting because they know the fact that these employees are not paid correctly. Hygienists are not paid overtime. Easy money for these law firms, easy money. That's, for example, not something that the TDIC or any insurance company covers because it's such a common problem, the overtime. But getting the insurance and making sure HR for Health is there will protect you, and you'll go into retirement knowing that you're safe, right? That's very important. Okay, last couple of things. Due diligence. This is homework that the buyer will do on your practice. Now, I bring this up because I don't want you guys to get offended when the buyers ask for this info, okay? Many sellers get offended. Why do you want to know all this stuff? It's good for you, for them to know, right? The more you open the kimono, right, and you show them everything you've got, the safer you are, right? And the reason is because if, God forbid, they ever say something like, oh, I didn't know that you only had 500 Delta patients. I was told you had 2,000 Delta patients. You're going to be like, you did due diligence. You should have found it. I didn't say anything. You didn't do your homework, right? So let them look at your entire practice, right? Don't be scared. Every practice has warts. No practice is perfect, and it's okay. It doesn't matter. Buyers are hungry for good practices. They will buy every practice out there. The problem is that if they don't know something that they get surprised by, that's when lawsuits and problems arise. But if they know, they're still buy the practice, they'll just attack it differently, right? They'll try to solve the problem. So you'll have financial due diligence. This is where a bank, like Panacea, will help a buyer analyze the numbers, look at the P&Ls and all that stuff. So they'll look at that. Sometimes they'll have their CPA look at your financials. Again, don't be scared. Give them everything. Legal due diligence, this is my part, right? The lawyers will ask to see your leases and other things. Again, don't be worried about it. Let them see everything. Practice management due diligence, this is where a consultant usually will go in and start looking at the practice data, right? How many new patients have you gotten? What kind of procedures are you doing? What's the age of the patient pool? All the information that's super important, the consultants will look at. Again, they usually don't come into the office anymore. Everything's done remotely. As long as you've got an NDA in place, right? Let the buyer's consultant remote in, pull the data that they need, and do the analysis. Okay, right? Just make sure you've got, an NDA before you let them access any of this information, which if you're working with a broker like Gavin, he will make sure all the buyers do. Okay. And so again, let them do their homework. Trust me, it's good for you, because if they ever come back, you can point to them having done their due diligence. Okay, again, it protects you. Okay, we talked about leases. If you don't know when your lease is expiring, send it to me. I'm happy to look at it and let you know for free. No obligations. Look and see if you have options to extend your lease. Most banks, right, require at least 5 years, right, Pat? Yeah, depends on the term. So the buyer will have to go and get a new lease from the landlord, no matter how long of a lease is left. Sometimes it's an extension of your current lease. Sometimes it's a brand new lease, right? But make sure you time the sale of your practice with the end of your lease, right? If you can, because that's very important. Yes.
If the buyer gets a new lease from the landlord,
Yep.
is your lease null and void then?
It depends. Also, most of the time, the answer is no in California. What they'll do is they'll give a new lease to the buyer that will basically say the existing lease remains as is until that term is done, and then the new lease takes effect. So you're still on the hook for the remaining term. But if you're super lucky and you have like a not very experienced landlord, then yes, if they give a new lease to the buyer, if I'm representing you, I would negotiate a termination of your existing lease. But again, it only really happens with like really mom and pop landlords that don't know any better, who are not represented by a lawyer. Like they have to be really, like new to the landlord game here in California. In most parts of the country, that's not the case. It's not standard for you as a seller to remain on the hook, but in California, it definitely is. And in the Bay Area, it 100% is. Okay, so if you can negotiate it out, but it's very rare. Okay, let's talk about DSOs really quickly. So there's a lot of different models with DSOs, right? There's a joint venture model where they basically make you like a partner of theirs. You sell 60, 70, 80% of your practice. You're still part of their organization. And the idea is that they take a big percentage of your practice, but you're still on the hook as an owner. And then they take a lot of other practices, they do the same thing, and eventually they sell to a larger organization. Okay, so that's the most common. There's also ones where you sell 100% of your interest, and you just work back for the DSO. And DSOs have gone through a sort of a little bit of a transformation. About 3 years ago, they were very, for the last 10, well, not 10 years, I would say up until COVID, they were very popular, but it didn't explode until after COVID. And after COVID, for about 2.5, 3 years, they exploded in popularity here in California as well. As you guys know, most endo practices right now are owned by a large DSO here in California. There's very few independents left. The same thing is happening in oral surgery and pedo ortho. I mean, it's expanding, but in the last 2.5 years, it's actually stopped. It's slowed down very heavily because a lot of them went out of business because they were not set up properly. They didn't have strong financial, strong leadership, and things of that nature. So there's a lot of trouble in this DSO space. In fact, there is 67 at last count, 67 DSOs in financial trouble as we speak, right? We had big ones fail last year, 130 offices, 60 offices, 20 offices. I mean, just big ones have gone under. And so it's been a little bit of a disaster for some of those that have sold. But what's remained, as I was telling some doctors earlier, are some of the better ones have survived. And so they're still buying practices, but you got to be very careful, right? You got to be very careful. Now, the way it works with DSOs is that they buy your practice and they buy a whole bunch of other practices and they combine them, okay? And then they try to resell it in 3 to 5 years to even a larger institution. So there's a couple of caveats here, right? One is they almost all require you to work 3 to 5 years for them after the sale. So if you are planning on retiring, you don't plan on working 3 to 5 years, the DSO model is not for you, okay? Not for you. If you have a practice that does less than $1 million of collections, DSOs are not for you either. It's my opinion. Gavin may feel slightly different about that, but I think it makes it really hard to make the numbers work, right? It may make the numbers really hard to work. So those two are sort of the starting points, right? You do have to be comfortable with change. They will change your practice. Maybe not day one, but day two for sure, right? Right? Day two for sure. So that may mean they change some easy things, right? They might go from one dental distributor, to another dental distributor. Those are easy changes. The harder ones are when they let go of what they consider excess staff, right? They might say, oh, we don't need this person and we don't need that person. Remember, their goal is to make you more profitable so they can resell the whole thing. So they will make big, drastic changes. But one thing they won't do is they will not get rid of you, right? Because they need you to produce at least the same level that you were producing before or more. So like I said, for 3 to 5 years, okay? Now, as I end, I want to talk about the one mistake I want you guys to avoid, okay? And this is one of the many things that Gavin does really well. The one mistake to avoid when you are selling, if you decide that you're going to sell to a DSO, is to never, ever, ever send them your financials, okay? I don't care if they tell you, hey, we'll get you the best offer ever. Sign this NDA, send us your financials. Within a week, we'll give you an offer. Of course, they'll give you an offer. You know why? You know why they're so excited about getting your financials? The reason they're super excited is because they value your practice on your profits, like every bank, right? Not on your collections, on your profits, right? It makes sense, right? $1 million practice that has $400,000 of profit is more valuable than $1 million practice that has $200,000 of profit, right? More profit, more value. What do you guys do when you prepare your financials and your tax returns? Do you try to show more profit or less profit? Which one? Less, of course. We want to give the IRS as little as possible, right? So of course they want your financials because they know you've got a lot of personal stuff in there that you're not even thinking about when you're giving it to them. So they're like, yep, give it to us. Oh, you have $1 million practice. You made $200,000 of profit. Beautiful. Here's $600,000 offer, $700,000, whatever the number is. But guess what happens when you actually have a professional like Gavin take your financials, work with you, and take out all the personal stuff, make it perfect, and then give it to them, right? you're not doing anything wrong, right? You're still filing your old tax returns with the IRS, right? The ones with all the extra, but now you've prepared financials that are real, that have the real expenses of the office, not the horses and the yachts and the multiple cars and vacations and Costco runs, like all the other personal stuff are not on there. And guess what? Now your profit goes up and they have to pay you more. Guys, very basic things that increase your value. Now you might say, Ali, how much money is this? Well, DSOs are paying 6 to 8x for every dollar. So if you add an extra, let's say $100,000, which is, really honestly not that much in terms of add backs, but let's say you added $100,000 of expenses back to your profits, that's $600,000 to $800,000 of value you just added to your practice. And you might say, okay, well, that's a lot of money, but it's not life-changing. Well, it's not just 6 to 800, by the way. It's 6 to 800 that doubles every 6 to 7 years if you have it invested, right? Because that's how it's supposed to be. So now you see the money can really be impactful, right, for you and your family. So don't make that mistake of sending your financials, no matter how easy they make it seem, because it's never to your advantage, right? Yes.
Is that rule for if you're selling to like a private practitioner?
Great question. Yes, the same rules apply when you're selling to a non-DSO, but the numbers are a little bit less, right? So you still have to do the same calculations, but instead of getting 6 to 8x, you get 2.5 or two times. But the profit calculation is a little bit different. It's too much to go through today, but it's very similar. Yeah, very similar idea. I still wouldn't send it in. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's 2 to 3x of what?
Profit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So for a private doctor, if you're selling to a private doctor, it's anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 times profit. The average is about 2 times. Okay. For DSO, it used to be like 7 to 9. Now it's like 5 to 8 times, right, Gavin?
Yep.
Roughly, yeah,
Yep.
Of profit. But profit's calculated slightly differently with each.
And the broker determines that profit for you.
A good broker will. Yeah. A good broker will. Okay, guys, this is if you guys want the notes for tonight, not just the slides, but the actual notes, go ahead and take scan this QR code and put your email in, and then you'll get my notes. So basically, if you haven't been taking notes, kind of like the way I've been talking, you'll see that in the notes for you. Perfect. And then did everyone get it? Okay. No? Sorry. Here we go.
What happens to my DSO when I'm doing the work back and they go out of business?
What happens to the DSO when you get to, if your contract's negotiated well, you get to buy back your practice. Yeah. So it actually is very stressful, but financially it actually ends up working out for a lot of doctors.
You get to buy your practice back at a significant discount. You don't have to give the money back that you got.
That's right.
When you bought it.
Yeah. So you get to buy it back. There's a lot of upheaval that happens, but usually you get it back for like 10, 20 cents on the dollar. So it financially can work out, but it's very stressful. It wasn't part of the plan. No.
You don't want to do that by design.
Yeah. So I'll let Gavin go, but if you guys have questions, let me know. We're here. This is my info, of course, and we'll have enough time at the end to chat too. Thank you. All right.
Now, you know what? Sitting here listening to that, I am suddenly so much more relaxed, because if you all listen to Ali and implement the things that he said, we're going to have a lot of fun together when it comes time to sell your practice, because all those little details that are kind of, in the transaction have been thought about and prepared for. So thanks for that, Ali. So just a little bit about myself, just to kind of give you a level set. Prior to founding Revolve Practice Transitions, I spent 25 years in the dental practice finance lending space. Some of you might have remembered the company Matsco. I started my career about 25 years ago during practice transitions, startups, and then for about 15 years of that career, I was running the division that became Wells Fargo Practice Finance. And so during that time, we probably saw 500-600 practice transitions a year across the country. And what's interesting, and you as owners know this, is when you're in a leadership position in an organization, nobody brings you the easy stuff that goes through without any problem. So most of the time, the stuff that landed on my desk was really in the most challenging category. And so, when I was looking at all of these transactions, what I really kind of thought about is, we spent so much time, as Ali said, helping, buyers understand what it's like to be a first-time owner and all the education, the content. But what we failed to kind of realize is that, all of you, despite working for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years, you're selling your practice for the first time. And there's just as much kind of anxiety and uncertainty that goes with selling as there is with buying. And so at a point in my career, now that I've reached, over the age of 50, I kind of shifted my efforts kind of the other side of the equation. And instead of kind of helping, buyers come into ownership and finance for the first time, I've moved myself over to help advocate for sellers who are seeking to exit. The good news is that I've spent so much time working with buyers that I understand how they think and process and make decisions. And I kind of bring that to the table. So what I want to talk about today is just, there's 4 kind of key obstacles that you're going to come across in the practice transition. We're going to take a little detour to one of the biggest questions that's on the minds of sellers all the time, which is, how much is my practice worth? And I'm going to give you some shorthand math to take a look at that. But ultimately, I just want you to know, I'm not here to sell your practice. I mean, if you want me to, we'll do that. But what I'm really here to do is tell you what's going to happen when you do, and to prepare yourself for the thought process that goes into this so that you're ready to go. So before I get started, I just have a question for the room. So show of hands, how many of you would say you're about 2 to 3 years away from selling your practice? That's a good amount. And that's always the majority of hands that go up, because what I find is that 2 to 3 years is close enough where you have to come to an event like this and learn about practice sales, but it's still far enough away where you don't really have to do anything about it tomorrow, right? So that's kind of the difference between being curious or committed, right? 2 to 3 years away, and I'll be honest with you, is about the time when that's a day one in the process. If you're 2 to 3 years away, when you add up some of the things that are going to happen, you're probably right up against the amount of time that you need. And that 2 to 3 years can be shaped in different ways in terms of how much time you might need after the sale. And this goes into some of the evaluation that I do with understanding your practice. And there are some nuances with practices where you may have to stay longer. And we'll talk about that. So again, I'm going to walk you through a couple of these things, but what I found is that for a successful transition, there's really just 4 key characteristics that go into it. And these are the things that it's not just me as the broker, but it's your attorney, your CPA, yourself is number one is communication. So we're selling an intangible asset. We're selling your philosophy of dentistry, your day-to-day culture and managing your staff. These aren't things that necessarily show up explicitly, in a product description guide or the financial statements. So active communication about, what you've been doing, how you've been doing it is really key, particularly when we start getting into the buyer and the seller discussions. The second is organization. Having the content that's ready to go so that when the buyer is engaging and everybody else is asking questions, we're organized and we've prepared our responses in advance for the things that we know that they're going to take a look at. Lastly, the third to last is time management. So everybody, like I said, buyer and seller is doing this for the first time. Nobody really understands how long certain things take. So for example, there's an insurance requirement on most loans. Well, sometimes the insurance can take 30 to 60 days to put in place. So we want to make sure that we get that timeline started early, whereas something else that only takes 3 or 5 days, we can save that to the end. So understanding where to put different parts of the transaction, time management is key. And then the last thing, be calm. be calm. Be calm. Because I will tell you, there is no perfect practice sale transition. To pursue perfection in a practice sale is to create a level of anxiety that's just artificial. I will tell you, there are things that just you can't control, whether it's your staff or something with the patients, the economic environment, the buyer. I mean, there are things that will show up. And, we've had a couple of examples of that. I had one seller, we were just about 30 days away from closing the deal. And the one main essential office manager that was key to the entire success of this transition stepped off a curb as she was getting out of her car, broke her ankle in 3 places and required surgery. And she was done, retired, out of the practice. I'm right in the middle of the deal. And he called me up and says, Gavin, this is what happened. I said, well, here we are. I mean, we didn't create it, but we got to deal with it. And so, we took active communication and key. We reached out to the buyer, told him what was going on, and, gave him some resources to help get some temporary staff in there. And we ended up getting the deal across the finish line. But it was just one of those things where we both knew there's nothing we can do about it. It just happened. So be calm, be patient, because that's going to give us the time to think and really work towards a solution. So let's start with the first obstacle that we're going to come across. And it's a pretty obvious one. You see it every day in the morning, and it's in this room right now. And that's you, right? This is our first obstacle to practice transitions. Where are you right now? And in most cases, you're asking yourself these 2 questions. Can I afford to retire? What will I do when I retire? And I'll be honest with you, these are emotional questions. These are hard questions to kind of come to terms with, especially for a business that you've owned, that you've built with your hands. You enjoy dentistry, your colleagues. And this is really where most clients, really kind of wrestle with. And what happens is these questions kind of pop in your mind at 8 o'clock at night after a long day, and you are not equipped to answer these questions, although you should probably chat GPT these questions and see what chat GPT says. I've actually done that with a couple of things. It's remarkable what they've been getting to say. But you're not equipped to answer these questions. And so you go to bed, you wake up the next day, your schedule takes over, and here you go, rinse and repeat. And every time we have this seminar, we're still 2 or 3 years away, but you've been 2 to 3 years away for 2 to 3 years, right? So the first thing to really do is change the questions that you're asking yourself and divide them into 2 categories. So the first one is on the financial side, and this is mathematical, quantifiable, right? The question is how much income do you need each year, and how much do you need to have saved to deliver that income? Simple math, right? This is where you call your financial planner, and they can run through a process. This is also where you might actually start to think about getting a practice evaluation, because you can add the sale of your practice into those totals and get an idea of where you stand. Once you have this left side of the page figured out, I would like to say you're halfway there, but in reality, I know that you're not. Because it's the right side that really becomes kind of a little bit more challenging. And these are more of the personal questions. Really is, do I want to keep working after I sell my practice, or do I really just want to retire and exit completely? How long do I want to keep working? And really, if you're struggling with maybe exiting the business, maybe flip the question around a little bit and just ask yourself, if I had more free time in the day, what would I do? And I think back to myself, I had largely been leaving the house every day at like 6:30 a.m. and commuting and coming back at 6:30 p.m. And then when COVID hit, I was working from home. And I saw all these things that my kids and my wife were doing that I had no idea existed, because they're just very little details within the day. And I really understood, right then and there, how much I had been missing for the last 20 years. And now that motivated me to do something a little bit different, not necessarily retire. But again, you've been consumed with this one thing that you've been doing, which is great. And I love the fact that you love it. But sometimes you have to challenge yourself as to what else might be out there. One piece of advice I would give you, and I was talking to a doctor about this on the way in tonight, is he had so much energy and very excited, and he really didn't want to retire. And I said, look, I said, if what you'll know that you made the right decision from a timing standpoint, if you feel bad on your last day. He's like, what do you mean? I go, you got to leave a little bit of joy on the table, because what's the opposite of that? The day that you sell your practice, you're running out of there mid-sentence because you can't wait to get the hell out of there, right? That's waiting too long, right? So if you're in a spot where you just leave a little bit of joy on the table, that's when you know you've done it right. And I think what will happen is when you get the answers to these two sets of questions is when you're going to move from being curious into the category of being committed. And instead of saying that you're 2 to 3 years away from retirement, you're going to say that you have a goal of exiting your practice by the end of 2026 or the end of 2027. And every day that you practice, you'll be making some progress towards that date and taking the steps that, you know, myself and Ollie had shared with you about that. The other thing that's really important about this is, depending on the type of practice that you have, in terms of its size and maybe the specialty of operation, or your desired path of exit, like a DSO or private party. Keep in mind that if you have some time that you want to be working, we may need to use some of that time for you to work back after the sale to effectively sell it. So if your practice is very large and beyond the capability of just a solo doctor kind of coming into ownership for the first time, you may have an ability to open up more buyers if you're willing to give maybe a year or more of time back in the practice on a part-time. If you're considering a DSO, I'm indifferent about where you want to sell your practice. I purposely play that role. I give you the information and let you decide. But the first question that I'm going to ask you is, do you think you can work for another 3, if not probably 5 years after the sale? If you absolutely can't, then we have to take that DSO corporate buyer off the table, because you just won't really get the traction on that scenario. If you say 5 years, then we're in business and we can probably get maximum value from that, right? So just keep in mind that depending on how you want to transition, we may need some of that time after the sale to cut into that 2 to 3 year horizon. Again, depending on the type of practice that you have. The opposite is true. You could have a very small, cozy practice, 400,000 or 500,000 in revenue, 2 or 3 operatories, but then you want to work back another couple years. That's probably not going to transition well with 2 doctors in a practice like that. I'd probably tell you, wait when you're ready to exit, right? So both kind of ring true. All right, you want to talk about valuations? This is fun. This is top of mind for everybody. Let me walk you through kind of a high-level analysis. I mean, I do an in-depth analysis for clients, but I'm also very transparent. I'll show you the nuts and bolts of it. But there's going to be 2 sides to the equation that goes into the evaluation. And the first side is where you start to introduce terms, seller discretionary earnings. Has anybody heard that term before, SDE? More of you have probably heard the term EBITDA before, right? Okay. So let me start with seller discretionary earnings. So really what that is that's the mathematical formula for profit with a doctor-to-doctor sale. So what we're going to do to calculate seller discretionary earnings is we're going to look at your financial statements and take the income line at the very bottom. Depending on how effective your tax strategy is, sometimes that's even a negative, right? Negative $50,000. I had a deal like that. It was a negative $110,000. Like, who would buy a business that's losing $110,000 a year? Well, somebody who understands how to make those adjustments, right? So the adjustments are going to come into 3 main categories. The first category are just simply excluded expenses. This is where you're going to have interest, income taxes, depreciation, amortization. These are all basic expenses that do not carry over to the buyer and are just simply excluded. Now, yes, everybody pays taxes. What we're talking about is some of you may have QuickBooks and your quarterly tax payments show up as an expense line item. Those are income taxes. Those get added back. I see that a lot. And they're pretty large payments. So that's first category, excluded expenses. Second category is owner compensation. This could be very easy or this could be very complicated depending on how aggressive you are with the way in which you distribute owner compensation. Could be family wages for non-essential members of the practice. Now, when I say about family wages, if your spouse is the office manager and playing that role and being paid a wage, we have to be careful about that adjustment. You're paying them a lot more than market, we can make some adjustments, but we can't just eliminate that family. What we're talking about is when you might have your kids on the payroll or your spouse on the payroll and they don't play a real essential role of the practice, right? Other owner compensation, retirement, your health insurance, that's all of those are adjusted. And then the last is the discretionary items. And the caution I would make you here is don't go hog wild on adding back discretionary items to the point that you erode the integrity of your analysis. So for example, auto expense, very easy to add back. Unless you are a mobile dentist, you really shouldn't need an auto expense to drive revenue. Where it gets a little tricky is when your office supplies include every single thing that you've ever purchased on Amazon.com. Okay, so that's where we have to draw the line. And by the way, some of you laugh because you know that I'm giving you very real examples of expenses, right? I've seen them all. So once we do all of that, we're gonna add back associate wages too, right? Because they may or may not need those doctor wages to drive the production. So we're gonna add that seller discretionary earnings, that number. And in some cases, you can go from negative $110,000, and I've gone all the way up to $400,000. The key is to make sure you can verify and back all those up, right? The average practice is going to sell to another doctor at 2 times that number. The low end of that range is 1.5. The high end of that range is about 2.5. A lot of you have heard about percentage of collections. I think collections are a part of the value of your practice, but not the defining metric that's used to ultimately value it. Because if all you do is just take a percentage of collections, you're going to disregard the value of the profitability. I'd much rather buy a business that's giving me $400,000 of income versus $200,000 of income, despite what the revenue is, right? So we want to have the higher profit practices are going to be more valuable. The other thing that's going to happen is that you base your multiple on profitability and you set your price that way. When it gets to the lender, it's going to cash flow. When you do it on collections and you have a low margin practice, you have an excited buyer and everybody agreed to the purchase price. It gets to the lender and they just can't make it cash flow. And the deal ultimately falls apart or gets renegotiated at a lower level. EBITDA. Does anybody really know what EBITDA is? This is my pet peeve about EBITDA. Because what a lot of people have done, including the DSOs, is they put this word in a way that makes it sound super complicated and mysterious to the parties that are out there actually creating the EBITDA, which is all of you. EBITDA is literally the acronym that spells out the formula in which to calculate it. It can't be more plain of sight than that. And so the only real difference between EBITDA and seller discretionary earnings is I'm going to simplify it for you. So after we've done that whole exercise of seller discretionary earnings, all you have to do is add in the doctor wages that are required to produce the dentistry, not the hygiene, but the dental production. Subtract that from seller discretionary earnings and you have your EBITDA. That's it. So start with seller discretionary earnings, subtract wages for the doctor production, excluding hygiene. GPs are generally 30%. Specialists can be anywhere from 35 to 50, kind of just depends on which specialty and which DSO is doing the calculation. And that's it. The multiples for DSOs we talked about are different. I would say 4.5 to 6.5 is like the typical range, but they can stretch to 8. The way that you stretch to 8 is you show growth. And so this is where we get into the kind of the right side of the equation a little bit, is if the average multiple is 2, how do you know you're average or above average or below average? This is where buyer demand comes into play. So depending on your location, size of facility, financial stability, you can go up on the multiple range or you can go down. Most of this is going to be risk-based. If I buy this practice, what bad things are going to happen? What growth opportunities do I have? If it's a highly desirable area, you're going to have 10 buyers versus maybe an area where there's only 1 or 2. And that's going to influence the multiple. If you're 5 years away from retirement and you're just kind of getting a rule of thumb, you can probably do this on your own and just kind of ballpark it. If you're really getting ready to sell and start presenting this information prospectus to buyers, that's where you would get a formal valuation. What I gave you today would work as a really good rule of thumb, but if it gets into the category of representing your practice for sale, that's where you might shift to a formal valuation. I want to make mindful of time. This is usually where we stop for questions. I'm going to pause for a minute to see because there's a lot in here. And I'm always available afterwards for that too. All right, so back to the obstacle. Second obstacle, and we're going to run through these, is they're not in this room, but we need them. And that's our buyer, right? And so one of the main things about, buyers that we think about is, as a seller, your competition are not the other practices that are for sale. Your competition with the buyer is the job they have right now and the safety and the security that they have in that job and their perceived risk of what's going to happen when they take over as an owner. And I use that word perceived very deliberately. I actually think there's potentially less risk as an owner. You don't realize it until you take it, but I'd much rather be controlling my own destiny than, showing up and looking at a schedule that I don't like, or worse yet, being fired because the new patient flow is reduced and the seller just can't afford to have me on there. But despite that, every buyer comes in and they're concerned about what this practice is going to do for them. And so what we need to think about as you prepare for the sale is 2 things. Number one, on the facility side. So the buyer's going to walk in, they're used to having certain things. But keep in mind that they're also used to just walking in, going into the operatory, and walking out. The one place that a buyer never really has to go into is the owner's office. So if you have an office in your practice and it looks like really stressful with a lot of paperwork and things all over the place, I would just say clean it up. Just shove it in a drawer, right? We want the buyer to look like you've never spent any time in that. Do it at home, right? Because that's where that's different. I don't have to deal with that, right? Tiny little thing, right? Ensure that all the equipment is working properly, right? Some of you have made do with things that are a little bit loose and rickety and it's fine, you like it. Maybe try and get the main equipment functioning properly. I'm not saying go out, sorry, I think Jaeger left, so now I can say it, right? Don't go out and buy a whole bunch of new equipment if you're selling you will not get your money out of it. If it works, just make sure that it works. I tell buyers all the time, they look at the equipment and go, that's a really old chair. I go, yeah, you know what's funny? Is that chair produces the same amount of dental revenue as the brand new one that you're going to get for $50,000. It's fine, right? Now, if it breaks, you can fix it. If it breaks and you have to replace it, so be it. But this doctor's making $1 million out of that chair. It's fine. But do repair the interior wear and tear, right? Because again, this is more emotional, right? So if something looks like it's neglected, what else is neglected? I'm about to give you $1 million and I'm trusting you that everything's taken care of because again, this is an intangible type of acquisition. Just make it look like you've actually taken care of it. Again, don't remodel the office. Don't buy new equipment, but just make it look like you're on top of it. The operations side, Ali talked a lot about this before, having a staff manual, having documented procedures, being able to articulate how you're attracting new patients, all key things to talk about in the sale. The main thing, if you haven't done it, look at your practice management reports. And I'm going to direct you to 2. Because I see this all the time. Run your accounts receivable report and run your patient credit report. Accounts receivable, 0 to 30 looks great. 31 to 60, a little bit lower. 61 to 90, a little bit lower. There's about a 10 years worth of revenue in the 120-day plus category that I often see because everything just kind of gets thrown in there, right? So take a moment to audit that, do what you need to do to kind of clean it up. Patient credits. When you run that report, this happens a lot. Seller will give it to me. Here's my patient credit report, because this is part of one of the exhibits that generally gets listed in the contract. And I open the patient credit report, and there could be 90,000 patient credits in there. And so you think this is right? Yeah, that's right. You do realize that every dollar of patient credits on this report is going to reduce the proceeds of the sale, right? Oh, maybe it's not right? So take a look at that report in advance, because a lot of times there's a lot of stuff that needs to be cleaned up, and it can be time consuming, and you don't necessarily want to do that when you're weeks out, from closing. This is also where you think about, well, should I talk to my staff, right? Because if you're painting things and fixing things and running reports and you've never done this before, your staff's going to be like, what's going on, right? First of all, try and do these things over time, subtly. Second of all, there's a time and place to talk to your staff, and it doesn't always feel good to wait to the very last minute. But generally speaking, no deal is done until the deal is done. And one of the things that people don't like when their employment is on the line is they don't like incomplete information. Because what happens when they get incomplete information is they fill in those blanks, not with optimism. Oh, I'm going to love this new buyer way more than I love the current seller, and they're going to keep my job and maybe even pay me more. It's the exact opposite of that, right? So what you want to be able to be in a position to do is introduce the buyer, let the buyer be there, have the buyer be prepared to tell them, I'm keeping you, I'm paying you, here's my philosophy. Everything, all those blanks get filled in at that moment. Still doesn't feel very good, and there's going to be some tears. And I had one seller tell me, he goes, well, Gavin, there better be some tears, because if they were happy, I'd be really sad. So it happens, but that's it. No offense to the loan people, the lenders here. They are a vital part of the process, but they're also going to be our third obstacle. Because if we haven't prepared for this, this is where the lender is going to start asking questions that the buyer maybe wanted to have the answer, but they didn't have the courage to ask. And this usually happens late in the game. By the way, every buyer likes to be the good person and blame everything on the lender. I've been a lender for 25 years. I know this. I've been blamed many times. Oh, the lender said I needed this. It's not me. Well, yeah, I mean, it is. But let's get this thing kind of organized up front. So what I've listed out here is what you should have ready to go for the lender package. Last 3 years of business tax returns. If you're on extension, that's fine. We'll get a profit and loss statement, a copy of the extension. Year-to-date financials should be within the last 3 months, right? The office lease, let's get a copy of that and let's figure out where that is. And Ali talked a lot about that. Procedure reports, getting understanding of what is being done in the practice, and payment mix reports, PPO, HMO, fee for service. Let's get all of that ready to go and have that at our fingertips. Potential info. One of the things that I'll do is I'll look through this financial analysis and I'll think like a buyer. And I'll have a conversation with you about some of the questions and concerns that they're going to have. And we're going to look for backup information. I had one transaction, actually it was a DSO transaction, and Ali knows about this. We talked about this recently, is I found a $200,000 expense that didn't belong on her tax return. And I said, your supplies are about $200,000 higher than they should be. Why is that? Turns out that her credit card payments and her supply payments were both lumped in together and doubled her supply expense to the tune of $200,000. And this is a 6.5 times multiple deal. So this is a $1.34 million issue when you factor in the impact to the profitability. She's like, well, what do we do? I said, get me all of your bank statements for the last 12 months, get me your credit card statements, and we'll be good to go. So we may find some things where we need to get the backup, and we'll make sure that those are fortified so that we can explain that. The lease agreement, I won't talk too much about this because Ali covered it very effectively, but the landlord is a disinterested third party. in the transaction that really doesn't care. So we need to try and get ahead of this and understand what we might need from the landlord in advance. Now, the landlord could be you, right? So if you own the property and you're thinking about selling or leasing, we want to get ahead of that as well. What I find is that if you want to lease the property or you sell the property, you just tell me what your preferred path is, and we're going to present that in the package. And if it's a lease, we're going to present what you want as the rent payment. Because what will happen is if we don't present that and your accountant did something different with the rent payment where you're paying yourself a really low rent, and then we come back and try and negotiate a rent up here, they're going to say, well, I based my whole valuation and financial on this old rent payment. What do you mean? So either we have to drop the rent or we have to drop the purchase price to make the deal work. We want to avoid all that. We do that up front. Renegotiate the lease. That's Ali's court. He covered that very effectively. I think in most cases, if you don't have what a buyer is going to need, don't prepare for it. Let the buyer take on that negotiation to ask for their extension or whatever it is that they uniquely need, for their scenario. And I just kind of want to close with, just a little bit of, grace, if you will. One of the things that makes you all very, very successful dentists is that when you start a procedure, you know exactly what to expect and the outcome that you're going to achieve. And as your patient, I am so glad that you do. Because if you came at me and said, well, we're just going to cut a couple of things and pull a couple of things and just see what happens, I'm probably going to run out of the room, right? Thing is when you're selling your practice, you kind of have to take a few steps not knowing what's going to happen, right? It is an emotional decision. And so as you take your time, kind of wrestling with this, just make progress. And most importantly, the only thing that I would say is don't do is if you wait too long and you start to kind of decline, it's not just devaluing the practice, it's changing the whole marketability of the practice because it introduces risk and it introduces kind of the uncertainty of what that buyer is going to expect when they take over. So as you're contemplating this, just make sure that you're able to maintain those production figures. And then when we have a chance to kind of take a look at it and plan for it, we'll make it happen effectively for you. So the fact that you're all here today is a monumental, giant step in the right direction. If you have any questions, there's a QR code here. You can actually go right to my calendar, schedule a meeting. Every transition is different. So I covered kind of the vanilla path to it, but there's a lot of nuances. And I really would welcome an opportunity to kind of really talk through your unique situation and help you understand what will be next for you and the timelines and everything else in there. So thank you very much for your time. I gave you 4 minutes. So, all right.